in. Thanks for coming and joining me here. My name is Nancy, in case this is your first time, and I work as an artist. Yes, so I know I haven't been around very much with art lately. I was going through a bout of low confidence, and getting in front of a camera seemed very daunting, but I did film a lot of work that was happening. It just never felt right putting it out because they were so disparate, you know? There didn't seem to be any like narration or any kind of like obvious chronology in between all of the different work I was working on. So we're solving that today. I'm going to be here. We're going to go through some of the things I've been working on. It's mostly painting and ceramics, and so we'll talk through it. I am excited because they were all things that I worked on to get me to where I am today in January 2024, where I feel a lot more focused and sure of what direction I'm going in and where I want to take my work. So all of that is very exciting, and I'm hoping that I will get over myself a bit and get more comfortable in front of the camera so I can move forth more in tandem with the present day. Like, we can be more in tandem with what I am actually currently working on. So at the end of this, I'll round it out by showing something that I'll be making today with some water-soluble graphite. Yeah, so I'm excited. I'm excited that you're here, and let's get started. We are going to start off with a landscape exercise. I am working on 3 paintings at once, each exploring the essence of a different season. There's winter, spring, and summer. The idea here is to work as quickly as I can and keep rotating between different paintings whenever anything needs to dry. During this time, I was part of a monthly creative group where we had a guiding theme that would fuel our artistic exploration. The group consisted predominantly of writers, so it was personally for me actually quite freeing to interpret the theme in a visual way without feeling like I needed to compare the results to other people. This month's word was thick, and even though there are plenty of ways to interpret this theme conceptually, there was a phrase that kept coming back to me time and time again, and it was definitely on my mind while I was making it, and it was in the thick of it. So I was really thinking about elements of the feeling of something hanging heavily in the air. There's also this phrase that came up a lot while I was reading books as a kid, and it was like the air was so thick you could cut it like butter. So yeah, that was on my mind a lot as I was making these. Each painting started off with a color gradient as a foundation. I'm laying very loose initial brushstrokes to get an impression of the overall composition. The flat brush that I'm using is purposefully large compared to the size of the painting to keep myself from getting too bogged down by intricate details at this phase. I think it's very easy to want to get things to look the way you want them to very quickly. But the reality is every painting is going to have an ugly phase, and you just need to trust that by building things, you will get to where you're supposed to go eventually. So here I'm focusing a lot on color and reminding myself, we're building layers. Nothing has to be exacting at this stage. I found that working on multiple paintings simultaneously and rotating between them is a very helpful technique to prevent me from overworking the surface, which is a very bad habit that I often struggle with. I struggle with it basically every single time I make any kind of painting, and I suppose it could be solved by switching the surface that I'm working with. Like, instead of paper, I could use like a primed canvas instead, but at the same time I also like the way it looks when I am struggling with the surface. So I don't know, it's like a habit that's good to break, but something to be aware that is part of my process. But anyway, being able to switch in between paintings, it allows for the necessary drawing time to actually occur, which is something I often ignore because I'm very impatient. I just want to keep working on the painting instead of like giving it some time to breathe and chill out. So that's one thing. But the second thing is that it keeps me from being too committed to any specific details that I might have otherwise grown attached to. Once a painting has the chance to dry and for the colors to really set in and you know what the value of them will be, it gives me the opportunity to reevaluate everything. My eyes are given a chance to reset and see things from a new perspective. And I find myself, like liking the way this certain paint color mixed with another paint color is in this specific corner, and then getting really precious about it and trying to preserve it, which ultimately doesn't serve the painting as a whole. So this exercise allows me to let go of that a lot more easily. And then thirdly, I get to build off of the experience that I just had with the last painting. So I can continue to hone in on a particular technique or skill instead of needing to rush to the next phase of the painting. I kind of stay in a similar phase between all of the paintings that I'm rotating between. And that's helpful. It's really similar to bread making, where you can't just make one baguette and feel like you have a sense of how to work the bread and shape it. You have to shape 20 baguettes at once, and to really start to get the feeling of what it's like in your hands and the structure of the dough. I'm not sure if this metaphor is perfect. I'm not sure if you're following, but I think about this a lot when I'm baking, and I think it's a good thing to apply to painting as well, to get really comfortable at every phase and the techniques involved. So as you saw, the first round was all light watercolor washes, then moving into thicker paint with more specific brushstroke patterning. In the subsequent layers, I began to incorporate other materials like gouache, which gives it an opaqueness and dimensionality. From there, creating texture is all an experiment of reaching for whatever materials are around me at that time. I had these tri-colored colored pencils that Henry bought for me a few Christmases ago that I never knew what to do with. I never touched them because the wrong color would just always come out whenever I used them. But I found that the randomness of these colors worked really well with the more impressionist way I was painting with these. So that actually helped a lot with, again, not getting too caught up with what something's supposed to look like and kind of just working with whatever came to the surface. I also had these old oil pastels lying around, which ended up being such a neat additional detail layer on top of all of the smoother painting, which, further thickened the work. And the nature of these oil pastels is that it will repel water. So laying on more watercolor washes on top of the oil pastels is a really fun experiment to work with. Just a lot of cool, intermingling of materials and learning how they work together on top of the surface itself is really fun. Yeah, I love the distinct images for each of these seasons. The lushness of an approaching winter, the vitality of a renewed spring blossom, the thick air of a vibrant summer. These impressions feel tactile and expressive in a way that I think was made possible by keeping the theme of thick in mind. I honestly didn't think it would matter that much. I was just painting and kind of vaguely thinking, I'll just present these and come up with an excuse for how they relate to the theme. But ultimately, I think it really did impact the way these were made. And yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to think of that as a practice. And I had a lot of fun doing these. A lot of good learnings, a lot of good results. And I'm hoping to continue to do more of these prompted painting sessions in the future. Okay, my ceramic side of art making has been very, very slow. I have a few different ideas I've been wanting to play around with, but because I don't have my own kiln, which isn't something I should have anyway at the volume of my output, I'm following someone else's firing schedule, which means that the turnaround from shaping something out of clay to getting back a fully vitrified ceramic piece is over a month. Honestly, the speed is pretty demoralizing, especially since I tend to set very unrealistically aggressive timelines for myself. But still, I'm proud that we're still pressing forth on this front and not giving it up completely. Every time I work on ceramics, I am reminded of how much I love working with clay. So here I am working with some basic white clay and shaping some painting accessories. It's a paint palette, which I created out of a slab, and then we'll get to some small paint pots that are pinched into their final shape. I'm hoping that eventually I will make my own paints, ideally from naturally occurring earth pigments, though I'll likely start with purchased pigments at the beginning. And then these ceramic pieces will be the eventual containers for my paints. I really could have just purchased some pre-made containers and gotten started with making paints more quickly, but it seems that I like to just make things harder for myself for the sake of feeling like I made something from start to finish. So I think even though things will take me a longer time and maybe a lot of these speed bumps are going to keep me from getting things done as quickly as I could, I will maybe feel very satisfied and very accomplished at the end of it all. And that's what I'm telling myself right now as I'm watching through this and realizing that I've been planning to make paint for the last 6 months and have not quite done that yet. Fun. Unfortunately, the palette that I made was broken when taken out of the kiln, but I'll probably do something like this in the future. I really do like how this turned out. The smaller pots were so therapeutic to make. I had to move my fingers in a very consistent and rhythmic way to make sure that they're all even in the same size, which was really great practice for making larger pinched pieces. I'm not that interested in throwing wheels or making the most perfect ceramic ever. It's not that appealing to make flawless pieces for me personally when it comes to clay, but I at least would like to make things that are structurally sound, relatively functional, and interesting to look at. So in that sense, these small pots, I think, were a good balance of all of those things. Look how cute they are all together. I'm really happy with them. Moving on to the next phase is the underglaze. I had these greenware pieces already made and they've been drying in the studio for a few weeks now. I've been looking at more and more blue and white ceramics, particularly Chinese porcelain, but also Delftware, which is earthenware created by the Dutch. I ran into this while I was researching the painter Johannes Vermeer, who is based in the city of Delft, hence Delftware. It was pretty wild just scrolling through, reading about the city, and then suddenly running into these pieces that had depictions of Western life in a style that looked distinctly Eastern, or at least something that I had associated with the East. It's a really intriguing mashup in the ceramic art world. I've always loved the way blue and white ceramics look as an aesthetic, probably because I was surrounded by it when I was growing up. But I never thought about making it myself because I sort of placed that style in a very particular box. It had a distinct painting style that I wasn't interested in replicating. But seeing the Delftware got me thinking about the potential of adopting the timeless colors and perhaps implementing my own designs. So this was my first foray into testing that out. I didn't actually have any plan in mind while doing this. I was really thinking of this as a test. Using these crafted greenware was really a different canvas, so to speak, for painting on top of. Definitely not something I am fond of applying meticulous detailed designs on. Maybe that's because I didn't have the right brushes, or I just didn't have a hang of the consistency of the underglaze yet. I don't know, something to keep thinking about as I continue to do this. One of these is inspired by No Face from Spirited Away, and the others are kind of freehand. There are two pieces that looked like they were meant to be paired up together, so I did a really simple yin and yang concept, but made cuter with these smiley faces. I don't know what it all means. You're listening to me watching myself try to figure out something that I don't have figured out yet, but it's kind of exciting to test all of this out. The process has been so long, though, and it's like excitement in ultra slow motion. So it's hard to identify it as excitement at all. Well, after some time, all of these pieces went over to get their bisque fire, and now they're ready to get glazed. The third installment of this saga, the final frontier. What a journey. What a time. To be honest, after they got fired, I took them home and let them sit in a corner for months because I was dreading the glazing process. I started with the small stuff. All of the paint pots got 2 coats of clear glaze. I wanted them to remain white because they'll be housing homemade paints. Having a neutral colored container will just make it easier to see the hue, shade, and temperature of the paint. This process took a pretty long time, but it felt rewarding enough that I got to glazing the bigger pieces the very next morning. So a lot of momentum being built up here. All of the bigger pieces are various pinched pots. I began experimenting with these pinching textures for some of them that I really enjoyed. It was so much more interesting to make and look at than the smoothed out pieces, though I think ultimately I like both for different reasons. I enjoyed making these textured pieces, but I wasn't sure how they would turn out with the glazes I was using. This bright terracotta looking glaze is actually a matcha colored chino glass glaze that I love so much, but it's been a hit or miss at times when used with this white clay. It really depends on how thick the layers I brush on are. The clay itself looks a bit basic when it's bare, so when I leave a part of this ceramic piece unglazed, sitting next to a glazed part, it just all looks kind of amateur. I think eventually I'll get some tan or brown colored clay to experiment with this glaze. I would imagine it would look great together, but sometimes it's hard to tell without trying. This other glaze I used mostly as an accent along the rim is an antique brass. A part of me wishes that I glazed at least one full piece with this antique brass, but I honestly couldn't decide which one to do. I think one of the textured pots would have been pretty cool, but I don't know. I probably got 2 in my head at the time, and I don't know, it's like hard to commit sometimes. Of course, the ones with blue underglaze design all got a clear coating to make sure that the design will still show up as planned, a nice blue on white. Yeah. There are also these organic looking shell inspired pieces that I used the clear glaze on. Though I'm now thinking as I'm watching this that a pearlescent white may have been better. This is my first time using this clear glaze, so I don't know, maybe it'll actually be perfect. Who knows? It's good to stay open at this phase and just plan for the future based on the results. All of these pieces will be fired the first week of February. I'm crossing my fingers they'll turn out well. I'll show them to you in the next video, and hopefully we'll also make some more. This is my footwear of choice today. I think I'm going to take off my shoes and just work in these socks. I love them so much. It says, Best Cat Mom, and then there's like a drawing of a cat. This last piece of previous work that we'll be looking at today is this larger painting that goes through a lot of questionable decision making on my part. I don't have a lot to say about it, and I think you'll be able to watch it and probably guess at what points I got bored and made poor decisions, at what points I was full of nervous energy and just frantically trying to figure things out, and at what points I felt like perhaps we were turning a corner. It's a painting process with an entire story arc in its own right, so I'll let it speak for itself. Instead, I'll take this time to talk a little bit about what I learned from this last year and where my head is at now. Last year, I struggled with finishing projects, and that can be broken down even further. It was difficult to get started on an idea. It was difficult to stay focused on one project, and it was difficult to press forward when I didn't meet my own expectations. I technically put a lot of hours in, but none of my goals were actually realistic because they were competing with each other instead of being addressed one by one or even planned out in a sequence that made sense. I also had 2 other commitments that took up most of my time. One being a full-time job at a bakery where I was learning to hone my skills in the kitchen for an endeavor that is way later on in the future that I'm looking forward to, but is not, my main focus right now. But it was still a good opportunity to take. And the second one being co-owning and running a film lab, something that I deeply value as a part of my presence in the Atlanta art community and has been really wonderful. Knowing that both of these things were on my plate, it's ridiculous to imagine that I could also, on top of it, while still getting sleep and maintaining my relationships, create as much artwork and explore new avenues of creativity as I wanted. It was, looking back, truly delusional on my part. And then once I actually found time to get started on a particular project, I would recognize that I'm not meeting any of my self-imposed deadlines, again, due to unrealistic expectations, and I would feel myself getting more demoralized and less willing to continue forth. I would essentially create a self-fulfilling prophecy of doom and failure that would create this cycle of disappointment in myself and a weird self-loathing that isn't actually conducive to creating work at all or even being happy to wake up. So that was definitely a mess. Something else that also threw a wrench into the whole ordeal was the fact that we planned an entire DIY wedding in the span of about 4 months. This obviously wasn't something that I factored into my plan for the year, but it was also something that was so incredible beyond my imagination. So in December, as I was reflecting back on the year, once I was done beating myself up over not doing the things I had set out to do, it took some time for me to recognize that there were a lot of other things that were accomplished in their stead. An incredible baking mentorship that I would not trade in for anything. A flourishing film lab that continues to grow day by day. And a partnership with someone that I love so much that it pushes me to be a better person. And none of these things are quantifiable in terms of artistic output, And it seems silly to even compare the two things. This year, I am going to keep it simple. No more definitive goals, no more I need to do this or I need to prove that. Just simply, I'm going to create something every single day. Maybe it's writing a haiku on a Saturday evening. Maybe it's editing a video on a Wednesday, having a long painting session on a Friday, or learning to shape a petard loaf on a Sunday, and so on and so on and so on. And maybe on a very good day, maybe it's all of these things. The point is that every movement forward should be considered a good thing. And all these disciplined actions will amount into something bigger than a demoralized complacency. Of course, I think I'll probably loosely set overarching goals to help guide what that thing is. But even if I have a week where I need to follow my whims, then so be it. It is still movement forward. Productivity cannot be measured by the things you cross off on your to-do list if your list was never a reflection of what is truly important in the first place. I worked on this painting over the course of 4 months, or maybe a little bit more. Who would have thought that this painting would end up this way? Who would have thought that I would, after thinking that it might be done, I would dump a ton of paint and indiscriminately smear all over it? And then who would have thought that I would desperately try to save it with oil pastels? Did you? Because I certainly didn't. And watching this over makes it look like I was moving with a plan in mind, but nope. This is it's kind of like horrifying to watch everything unfold. But, we never know how things will turn out, and the important thing is continuing to see it through. And I certainly did with this painting. I'm not sure if I like it. I'm also not sure if I hate it. I think it's just something that I'm at the very least glad that I completed and that it exists as it does in the world, and I will leave it at that. And now we're here at the present again. There are tons of clips that I didn't end up including in this video. I didn't realize just how much I actually painted and recorded, which is a very cool thing, and big kudos to past me, but we should really save those for another time. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to round this all out with some graphite drawing. At the start of this year, I've been interested in beginning from the basics. I wanted to start with pieces that would focus on tonality and composition, because I find that sometimes color can be a distraction for me. I was happy to find these water-soluble graphite for this purpose. I am so glad I still get to, do black and white, but still be able to use water and a brush, things I'm really comfortable with. Of course, there's still a learning curve as with any new material. For example, the package says you're supposed to be able to erase the graphite once it dries, but it turns out that it doesn't work as well as advertised, and I need to be more careful than I thought. This is something I probably could have really easily tested out before doing this piece, but this piece was an effort to test it out, so that's my excuse. I also tried using masking liquid for the first time ever, something I've avoided, honestly, probably out of sheer laziness to add yet another material to my toolkit. I felt like I was always able to get by and make the things I wanted to make without it. But this seems like a good time to bust it out and try to figure it out. Unfortunately, it didn't have enough time to dry, so it got pretty messed up when I went in with the water-soluble graphite earlier than I should have. In fact, the mess started even before that when I was trying to open the bottle. I had no idea how to do it and ended up breaking off the entire cap of the bottle. And then I tried to haphazardly tape it all back together. It looks ridiculous and it made me feel so stupid. But in hindsight, it's kind of funny to watch the clips and see the tape around the bottle. It still works. I want to play around with being more precise with this. I tried to mask some writing on the windows, but like I said, it didn't turn out as planned, and that's okay. I think I need to get a better handle on how much I need to squeeze and the quickness of my wrist movements when using it for more precise line work, but just another thing to learn. I'm also wanting to downsize a bit for now, work on slightly smaller surfaces that I can finish in one sitting instead of these huge paintings that span over several weeks to months. I'll get back to them eventually, maybe when I have an idea that is too good to resist and I need to have it on a larger canvas. But for now, I'm really enjoying just sitting in one place at my desk by the window, watching these forms emerge. I think there's something really nice about having the emotional arc of creating a painting, which often includes some semblance of frustration and struggle in the middle of it, and having that boundaried by one painting session instead of ending a session in frustration and then coming back to it the next day or the next week and having to get myself emotionally in there again. When I end frustrated, it's hard to get me to want to come back to it. So sometimes there's weeks in between me returning to a painting, which can be a good thing, but then it takes me then forever to work up the courage to get back to it. And so there is something really like immensely satisfying about having it all bucketed into one sit. So that's something that I'm currently reveling in right now as a shift in how I make things. I am also, excitedly, relearning a lot of art history that I read and forgot while I was in college, and studying the masters has been a great source of inspiration. I'm actually diving even deeper into the details of each artist because I think in art history classes we always explored the arc of like different art movements rather than like really drilled in deep into anyone's particular practice or life. So that's been really fun. It's been a great source of inspiration, and I'm thinking about ways to share this wealth of knowledge that I've been so lucky to be intaking. Perhaps soon we'll be able to ooh and ah over the same artists and paintings together. I'll have to figure something out. But for now, this is it. This is the end. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been quite a long doozy of a video, but very fun for me to get out there, and hope it kept you company in whatever you were doing, and I will see you next time. Bye.